SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. Picture this. A charismatic politician stands before the most powerful assembly on earth. He comes from a family of heroes, but he's broke and desperate. And here's his pitch: wipe out all debt, assassinate the leaders, and burn the capital to the ground. Basically, he's offering a revolution wrapped in chaos. And the terrifying part? A lot of people are actually on board with this. Facing him is another man, brilliant orator, self-made philosopher, government leader. Unlike his blue-blooded rival, this guy clawed his way to the top through raw talent and ambition. He's uncovered the plot, and on this tense November morning in 63 BCE, he confronts the would-be revolutionary right there in the Roman Senate. Every eye locks on him as he launches his attack, with words that will echo for over 2,000 years. Quo usque tendem abutere, Catilina, patientia nostra. Roughly translated, seriously, Catiline, how much longer are you going to test our patience? This isn't some Hollywood screenplay. This actually happened in ancient Rome, a civilization that still shapes how we think about politics, law, and power today. Rome's story is basically the ultimate tale of ambition, how one unremarkable village in Italy somehow ended up dominating 3 continents and creating the blueprint for Western civilization. In her masterwork, SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome, scholar Mary Beard takes us on a 1,000-year journey through this remarkable civilization. The title itself, SPQR, comes from that classic Roman phrase, Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome. It's all about that relationship, that constant, often violent debate over who really holds the power. Today we're diving into the grand story of this incredible book. But here's the thing. This isn't just dusty old history. This is our story too. By the end, you'll understand Rome's secret to lasting 1,000 years. Spoiler, it wasn't just about legions or emperors. It was a revolutionary idea about citizenship that still shapes our world, our politics, and even how we think about ourselves. So let's jump in, starting right in the middle of the drama at Cicero's finest hour. The showdown between Cicero, defender of the state, and Catiline, the revolutionary with a cause, is the perfect entry point into Rome's story. This is the first period where we have enough material, speeches, personal letters, poetry, that we can actually see the world through their eyes. You can practically feel the tension. In 63 BCE, Rome was massive, over 1 million people, the largest city in Europe until the 1800s. It ruled everything from Spain to Syria, but here's the twist: no emperor. It was a republic, governed by the Senate and the people, SPQR. Yet this republic was tearing itself apart at the seams. The clash between Cicero and Catiline wasn't just personal beef. It was a fight for Rome's soul. Cicero painted Catiline as a monster, a symptom of society's moral rot. But was it really that simple? As Mary Beard shows us, history never is. Rome was going through an economic crisis at the time. People weren't just losing money, they were losing everything. Catiline's promise to cancel all debts wasn't just political theater. For thousands of struggling Romans, it was a lifeline. So what was he really? Terrorist or freedom fighter? Desperate criminal or principled rebel? And Cicero? Brilliant, sure, but also deeply insecure. As a new man, without fancy ancestors, he was always the outsider among Rome's aristocratic elite. He desperately needed his hero moment, his chance to save Rome. Did he maybe oversell how dangerous Catiline actually was? Did his quest for glory push his rival into a corner where violence became the only option? These are the kinds of questions SPQR pushes us to ask. It teaches us to read history against the grain, to hunt for the other side of the story. Cicero won, naturally. He drove Catiline out, and the ragtag revolutionary army got crushed. Cicero became Pater Patriae, father of the fatherland, but victory came with a price tag. In the name of national security, he had several conspirators executed without trial, violating a fundamental right of Roman citizens. This decision haunted him for the rest of his life, and it raises a question we're still wrestling with. How much should we sacrifice civil rights for security? When, if ever, is it okay to bypass due process to eliminate threats? The Romans debated this for centuries. So do we. Cicero's story shows us a republic at its peak, yet teetering on a knife's edge. But how did Rome even get here? How did this city become the center of the world by 63 BCE? To understand that, we need to rewind through 7 centuries of myths and legends. Every Roman knew the story by heart. Twin boys Romulus and Remus, descended from a Trojan hero, are born in secret. Their paranoid great-uncle, seeing them as threats, orders them drowned in the Tiber. But the servant can't do it, and leaves them in a basket by the flooded riverbank. Before they wash away, a she-wolf finds them and nurses them back to health. That image, the wolf and the twins, became Rome's most famous symbol. But as Mary Beard points out, it's one of the weirdest foundation stories ever. It's packed with violence, murder, and sexual assault. When the boys grow up, they decide to found their own city. But they argue about location. Romulus starts building a wall, and Remus, mocking him, jumps over it. In a rage, Romulus kills his own brother. And that's how Rome begins, with fratricide, brother murdering brother. As Romulus struck the fatal blow, he shouted, "This is what happens to anyone who jumps over my walls." Talk about a dark beginning. For later Romans, this myth felt like a terrible prophecy. It seemed to explain their endless cycles of civil war. A city founded on a brother's blood, they feared, could never escape citizens killing citizens. The story of Cicero and Catiline, of Pompey and Caesar, they all seemed like replays of that first tragic day. But there's another crucial part of the myth. After killing Remus, Romulus needed citizens for his new city, so he declared it an asylum. He opened the gates to everyone: runaway slaves, criminals, exiles, refugees. Basically, if you needed a fresh start, Rome was open for business. This created a city full of men, but no women. To solve this problem, Romulus hosted a festival and invited the neighboring Sabines. Mid-party, he gave a signal, and his men abducted the young Sabine women to become their wives. This story, the, quote, rape of the Sabines, was another disturbing piece of Rome's origin. Did Roman marriage really begin with mass abduction and violence? Roman writers endlessly debated it. But beneath the disturbing surface lies one of Rome's most important ideas: an extraordinary openness to outsiders. Unlike Greek city-states, especially Athens, which jealously guarded citizenship, Rome had this unique capacity to absorb foreigners. This wasn't about being liberal or tolerant in our modern sense. It was deeply practical and, ultimately, revolutionary. Romulus's asylum suggests that, from day one, being Roman wasn't about bloodline or birthplace. It was about loyalty. This idea became Rome's secret weapon. Over centuries, as Rome conquered its neighbors, it didn't just rule them. It gradually turned them into Romans, granting citizenship, rights, and a stake in the Roman project. This process culminated in 212 CE, when Emperor Caracalla declared every free person in the empire a Roman citizen. It was the completion of a 1,000-year journey that started with Romulus's asylum. So we have these powerful, troubling myths: But what about reality? What does archaeology actually tell us about Rome's beginnings? If you dig deep beneath the grand marble ruins of the Roman Forum, you'd find something much humbler. Traces of a simple cemetery from around 1000 BCE, with cremated remains in little urns shaped like huts. And on the nearby Palatine Hill, you'd find faint outlines of the huts themselves, small, circular dwellings made of wood, clay, and thatch. The truth is, for its first few centuries, Rome was completely ordinary, just another little village, one of many in central Italy. Nothing suggested it would one day rule the world. In fact, some neighbors, like the Etruscans to the north, were far richer and more sophisticated. Which brings us to the central question of SPQR. How did this ordinary village make the great leap forward? How did it become Rome? The answer lies in the first few centuries of the Republic, after Romans overthrew their kings around 509 BCE. This period is also wrapped in myth, but we're getting on firmer ground. The story Romans told was of a long, bitter struggle called the conflict of the orders. This was a clash between the patricians, the small hereditary aristocracy hogging all the power, and the plebeians, the mass of ordinary citizens who were shut out. For 200 years, the plebeians fought for their rights. They used a unique weapon, mass walkouts, essentially general strikes where they'd abandon the city and refuse military service until their demands were met. Slowly, step by step, they won. They gained their own representatives, the tribunes of the people. They forced the patricians to write down the laws for the first time, in the famous 12 Tables. Eventually, they won the right to hold any office, including the consulship, the highest position in the land. This struggle forged a new political system. It created a ruling class based not just on birth, but on wealth and achievement. And it created an intensely competitive political culture where military victory was the surest path to glory. This hungry new elite, combined with a system that demanded constant proof of greatness, helped fuel Rome's relentless expansion. But the real engine of that expansion was Rome's unique approach to citizenship. After defeating its neighbors, the Latins, in the 4th century BCE, Rome did something revolutionary. Instead of just subjugating them, it gave many of them citizenship. This shattered the ancient link between citizenship and a single city. You could be a citizen of your hometown and a citizen of Rome. The consequences were massive. Every time Rome won a war, its military manpower grew. Defeated enemies became new Roman soldiers. This created a self-sustaining cycle of conquest. As Mary Beard explains, Rome's greatest strength wasn't tactics or technology. It was its almost inexhaustible supply of soldiers. By the end of the 4th century BCE, Rome could field more men than any other Mediterranean power. They might lose battles, but they couldn't lose wars. This set the stage for Rome's explosive growth in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE. The Punic Wars against Carthage, its great North African rival, were some of history's most devastating conflicts. The Second Punic War is famous for Carthaginian genius Hannibal, who crossed the Alps with elephants and inflicted terrible losses on Rome, most famously at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. That single afternoon, as many as 70,000 Romans may have died. Almost any other state would have surrendered. But Rome, thanks to its vast reserves of citizen and allied soldiers, didn't. It absorbed the losses, regrouped, and eventually, under Commander Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, took the fight to Africa and defeated Hannibal on his home turf. Rome now controlled the western Mediterranean. Its armies soon turned east, conquering Greece and pushing into Asia. By 146 BCE, in one brutal year, Romans destroyed both Carthage and the wealthy Greek city of Corinth, They were the undisputed Mediterranean superpower. But this vast empire, acquired almost accidentally, created problems that the Republic's small-scale political institutions couldn't handle. The spoils of empire, massive amounts of gold, land, and slaves, flowed back to Italy, widening the gap between rich and poor. Enter the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, in the late 2nd century BCE. These aristocratic reformers saw the plight of Rome's poor, many of them soldiers who returned from long campaigns to find their farms gone. The Gracchi tried to redistribute public land to the landless. For this they were both murdered by mobs of fellow senators. Their deaths marked a terrible turning point. For the first time since the fall of the kings, political disputes were being settled with bloodshed in Rome's streets. The following century was a story of escalating violence and civil war. The Republic's principles, shared power and yearly offices, stretched to the breaking point and then shattered. The empire demanded long-term military commands and vast resources, concentrating enormous power in a few hands. Men like Gaius Marius, a new man elected consul and unprecedented 7 times, and his rival Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who actually marched his army on Rome and declared himself dictator. These were the first great warlords of the late Republic. They were followed by even more powerful figures. Pompey the Great, who conquered the East and became Rome's richest man, and his rival, Julius Caesar. We all know how that story ends. After conquering Gaul, Caesar, facing prosecution by Senate enemies, made a fateful choice. In 49 BCE, he led his loyal army across the Rubicon River, Italy's boundary, plunging the Roman world into catastrophic civil war. He defeated Pompey, and by 45 BCE was Rome's undisputed master. He became, quote, dictator for life. To many, he seemed to be aiming for kingship, the title Romans had hated for 500 years. So on the Ides of March 44 BCE, a group of senators led by Marcus Junius Brutus, descendant of the man who'd expelled the last king, stabbed Caesar to death in the name of libertas, liberty. They thought they'd saved the Republic. They were wrong. They'd only triggered another, even more terrible round of civil war. The assassins killed a tyrant, but didn't eliminate tyranny. Out of the chaos emerged Caesar's heir, his teenage great-nephew Gaius Octavius, whom we know as Octavian. For 13 years Octavian fought his rivals, including Caesar's assassins and his former ally Mark Antony. The final showdown came in 31 BCE at the Battle of Actium. Octavian defeated the combined forces of Antony and his lover, Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. They both committed suicide, and Octavian at just 32 was the sole ruler of the Roman world. The Republic was dead. But what would replace it? Octavian, now renamed Augustus, was a political genius. He knew Romans would never accept a king, so he created one-man rule disguised in the Republic's old language. He called himself princeps, or first citizen, not emperor. He held traditional offices. He treated the Senate with respect. He preserved all the old forms, while holding all the real power. He controlled the army, having learned the late Republic's lesson. He created a professional military with regular pay and state-funded retirement benefits. This broke the dangerous bond of personal loyalty between soldiers and their generals. He monopolized military glory. From now on, only the emperor or his family could celebrate a triumph. He transformed Rome itself, boasting that he, quote, founded a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He sponsored poets like Virgil, whose epic poem the Aeneid told of Rome's divine origins and destined greatness, with Augustus as its culmination. He created an image of himself as the restorer of peace, tradition, and morality. This was the Augustan template for being emperor, a model of autocracy that would last the next 200 years. His successors, the 14 emperors from Tiberius to Commodus, were a mixed bag of the good, the bad, and the truly bizarre. We remember the names: the reclusive, paranoid Tiberius, the monstrous Gaius, better known as Caligula, the scholarly, stuttering Claudius, and the infamous Nero. The stories about these men are lurid: incest, madness, cruelty, excess. But Mary Beard urges skepticism. The emperors' history was written by senators, men often hostile to the ruler, and new emperors always had an interest in trashing their predecessors' reputations. Was Gaius really a monster who tried to make his horse a consul, or was he turned into a monster after his assassination? The truth is, for most of the 50 to 60 million people living in the empire, the emperor's identity probably didn't matter much. His character made a huge difference to the small elite circle in Rome, but the basic government structure and provincial life remained remarkably stable. So what was life like for the 99%? The Roman world was vastly unequal. A tiny elite, like Pliny the Younger with his luxurious country villas, lived in incredible comfort. At the other extreme were the desperately poor, living in crowded, dangerous multi-story apartment blocks called insulae, or islands. They worked long hours at tough jobs: bakers, laundry workers, porters, their lives a constant struggle. But SPQR helps us see beyond elite stereotypes. We find evidence of vibrant popular culture in Pompeii's wall graffiti, in gaming board slogans, and in art decorating local bars. We see people for whom work was a source of identity and pride. And we see a world where social mobility was possible. The most famous example is Trimalchio, the fictional character from Petronius's novel Satyricon, a ridiculously rich, vulgar, unforgettable ex-slave. He's a parody, but he represents a real Roman phenomenon: the slave who could become richer than the aristocrats who once owned him. This brings us back to that unique Roman characteristic: openness. The empire wasn't just a system of rule, it was a system of movement. People, goods, and ideas flowed across the Mediterranean. Soldiers from Belgium ended up on Hadrian's Wall in Britain. A Syrian man named Barates married a local British woman, Regina, and set up a tombstone for her in South Shields, with an inscription in both Latin and his native Aramaic. This was the world Caracalla inherited. By 212 CE, the distinction between Roman and provincial had become increasingly blurred. The empire was run by senators and emperors from Spain and Africa as much as from Italy. When Caracalla made his revolutionary decree, he was simply recognizing a reality that had been 1,000 years in the making. So what do we take away from this epic 1,000-year story? For me, the most powerful lesson in Mary Beard's SPQR is that Rome's greatest invention wasn't the arch, the aqueduct, or even its law code. It was the idea of citizenship. Rome's ability to expand the definition of Roman, to incorporate vast numbers of different peoples into their state, was the engine of their success. In a world where identity was usually fixed and exclusive, Romans created a model that was fluid, inclusive, and political. It's a profound and challenging idea that speaks directly to our modern debates about immigration, identity, and what holds a society together. Another enduring theme is that tension between liberty and security we saw so clearly in Cicero and Catiline's story. The Romans never resolved it. The Republic's commitment to citizen liberty ultimately couldn't withstand the pressures of a world empire, which seemed to demand an autocrat's strong hand. Rome's history is a sobering reminder that free institutions are fragile, and the slide from republic to autocracy can be slow, messy, and almost imperceptible, driven as much by circumstance as by ambitious tyrants. But perhaps the most important thing SPQR teaches is a way of thinking about the past. Mary Beard shows us that history isn't a simple collection of facts, a neat story of heroes and villains. It's a conversation. It's about asking questions, being skeptical of the victor's version, and trying to hear voices that are usually silent. It's about understanding that Romans were as divided, complex, and contradictory as we are. So how can we apply these lessons in our own lives? Here are a few thoughts. First, next time you see that famous acronym SPQR, maybe on a drain cover in a European city, remember it represents a question, not an answer. It represents a 1,000-year argument about where power should lie, with the elite Senate or with the people. It reminds us that the relationship between government and governed is always a negotiation, a struggle. Second, think about Rome's citizenship model. In our world, we often think of identity as something fixed, tied to a single place or culture. Rome offers a different model, where you could be a citizen of your hometown and of Rome, where Latin could be a political status, not an ethnicity. It challenges us to think more creatively about what belonging can mean. And finally, when you read about history's great figures, the Ciceros, Caesars, and Augustuses, remember, they're only part of the story. Rome's history was also shaped by the silent majority, peasant farmers, soldiers in legions, household slaves, women running families. SPQR is a powerful reminder to look for the history written between the lines, the stories not usually told. That was a summary of SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. We've covered the highlights today, but honestly, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic happens when you read the book yourself. It's in those quiet moments when a particular story or simple phrase from an ancient writer hits you unexpectedly. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book deserves your time. If anything we've discussed today resonates with you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see the foundations of our world. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book. Let's keep exploring history's greatest ideas, and let's keep growing together.